Welcome back. I am Dallas Burgess, and we are now entering the innovative immersion session of today's Veterans Lounge. Today, we are going to be talking about different healing properties of immersive qualities in entertainment. And I'm sitting here with Erik Johnson, and I'm not going to talk about you because I think you can do that. I
You want me to go ahead and talk about me?
Yeah, but with the mic though.
Oh, with the mic, okay. Well, thanks so much for having me. First of all, it's an honor to be here. I'm always excited to be able to talk to about veterans and do everything I can to help support everything there is to be for veterans either leaving the service or still in the service. So this is an honor for me to be able to be here. So, but I'm Erik Johnson. I'm an occupational therapist. I currently am an assistant professor at the University of Mary Hardin-Baylor and the master's program there. And I served 20 years in the Army, and 15 years of that was as an occupational therapist. And so I saw a lot of different opportunities to work with amputees up at Walter Reed, burn patients down at the burn center. When I was deployed, I did a lot of work with brain injuries and stuff like that. And so, throughout my career, throughout my life, I've looked for different avenues to be able to actually use technology, in different one way or another, either whether it be like for concussions or cognitive impairment or physical disabilities, whatever. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, but that's just a little bit about me. So, yeah.
Well, again, before we get too deep into some of the concepts and ideas that you've been exploring and playing with, I'd like to know a little bit more about your background historically within the military. And because you and I had a conversation earlier today about an interesting connection to some of our deployments to Afghanistan, and I'd like to hear more about that because those experiences, I feel that if a lot of veterans watching this are going to understand, right? They're going to get it immediately. But for the citizens out there that are watching this that might want some context, I think those experiences really kind of speak to your motivation behind doing what you've done.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, when I first deployed, right before, I had a guy who was injured in Iraq. He came back and he was talking to me about how important it was that I deployed. Treating patients and understanding just the day-to-day rigors that it is to be in a combat environment. And we were talking earlier about being in Afghanistan, and we have these conversations about like, when were you there, where were you there, and then all of a sudden these dots start to align, and it's really cool because now all of a sudden, not knowing you at all, I have so much in common with you. And in the patient, when I came back after being there for about 14 months, the patients that I would work with that would have lost limbs, all of a sudden you have clout because you're like, oh, well, you were down in NERC or Airborne, or you were down at JBAT or whatever, and then all of a sudden there's a conversation that can happen. For me, it's everything, because if I'm going to work with a patient, and if I'm going to work with a veteran, or even if I'm not going to work with a veteran, building a rapport with somebody, being able to tell them that, hey, you're important, and what you did was important, and the connection that we have right now is really important. And being able to go from there to build a relationship, whether it be therapeutically or just as friends, is everything. I left in 2009, December 2009, to go to FOB Shank in Afghanistan, and I was immediately welcomed by the 173rd from Italy, and they kind of took me in as their own, and we kind of established what we wanted to do treating brain injury over in Afghanistan, because what we were seeing is a lot of guys would get these concussion injuries and being sent straight home and to never return. And so we were trying to figure out a way, how can we treat them in theater and kind of maintain their presence within their units, the rapport, to keep them mentally well. Because if you're ripped out of theater for a brain injury, all of a sudden, not only are you trying to recover from that, you're trying to recover from that mental health issue that says that you weren't good enough to stay in theater. You're not with your brothers and sisters anymore. You're not fighting for America anymore. you weren't strong enough to stay. And so it's very important for us, and thankfully, the military saw that there was such a huge need to take us back over there and treat that in theater. And so my primary mission, I was I ran a pilot program that treated those concussion injuries in theater. So if somebody were to be blown up, let's say in a Humvee or some of our other vehicles, and they only suffered some kind of concussion type injury, they would kind of come to our program. We would do a quick screen on them and would help them recover in place. And that was like super, super important at the time. And so, so we learned a lot in that program. And from the one program that we did a pilot with, we had 8 other programs like thrown in Afghanistan right after. So obviously we saw there was a need. Obviously we saw that it was important, not only treating the concussion injuries, but also those kind of mental health injuries and issues that we've seen come from that. So so that's kind of where that comes from. And again, super important to me and my existence as an occupational therapist to be able to know what that looked like and how I can move forward to most appropriately treat veterans, whether they're physically injured or just have mental health, and I say just, but not just, but mental health injuries or whatever. So, yeah.
Right. So that's and that's where people in your position, right? Where you're receiving a lot of this and you're seeing a lot of this, and you're in a unique place where you can actually start to evaluate and internalize in your mind, like, well, okay, these are the tools that I have. This is all that I have to work with here. But where's the follow-up? What next? I mean, and when you're in country, what next is not really a possibility, and that's just by nature of the beast, right? But and I like that you were already kind of thinking along those lines of, well, what's the follow through? Like, what about when these guys and girls get home? Like what they've done here, and I've gotten them to the point where they're alive and now they're there. So, but there's a whole different life ahead of them now. So, what did you get into then at that point that allowed you to take that next step?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we would do, especially right from the get-go, if somebody were to have sustain a blast injury or something like that, and then it was a concussion or something, we know, and we'd be naive to think that they didn't get some kind of mental health thing from that. I mean, somebody just tried to kill you. I mean, right. If this was like in America and somebody shot at you but didn't hit you, you'd be terrified. You would have probably a lot of issues from that, a lot of anxiety and a lot of stuff that comes from that. Somebody just tried to shoot me. So it's interesting because when we deploy, we got, mortared every day. We took indirect fire every day. And it got to the point where we were so used to it, so conditioned to it, that it wasn't news. And I remember talking to some of the guys, like, if this was in America, they wouldn't stop talking about this for months. Like, oh, well, who shot it? Why did they shoot it? Where is this guy? What is their background? What was their motivations? And, and one thing that we wanted to do was normalize how they reacted to some of these things. Because if guys got blown up and they had concussion injuries and mental health injuries, I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable and confident their physical injury would heal, but we still needed to address some of the mental health issues that they might continue to have. Because after the physical injury healed, we would push them back to their units and they would still have to perform. And how is it that they were going to perform with some of these, challenging things, not wanting to look weak, but also be able to, feel confident that they could do exactly what they were doing before. So that was always tough. And I would tell them, like, your reaction to this, being scared, being anxious, maybe PTSD, is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. This isn't normal. We shouldn't be normalize explosions and death and pain. It's not a normal situation. So, what you're going through doesn't make you soft. It just makes you a normal human, and we want to maintain the humanity in the soldier.
Right, and when there's also with a lot, I know with me, it affected me in different ways. There was more of a delay, right? And it's not that those things bothered me, but it was because it became not normal, but a way of life over there. That the way of life here was so foreign because our brains had been altered. Our line of thinking was totally different. So without having that, how do you exist, in a normal world? In a way, it's comparing a NASA pilot. Whenever they go up to space and they come back down, like what's next? I've already done like the highest thing a human can do. It's similar in a lot of ways. So I think TBI is one of the most under addressed issues. And not to downplay, a loss of limb or any of those elements, right? Because those have significant challenges, but those are visible wounds, right? And there are, and which you're going to show us here in a minute, some apparatuses and some different things that you're helping, amputees and all that kind of stuff, be able to exist as normally as they can or as they did before, right? But TBI being a major element, and that's where I feel that technology can now start steering and addressing a lot of those TBI issues and PTSD issues, because those are sometimes separate and sometimes one and the same, but I feel like, be understanding the way the brain works and understanding the way the wiring works, and understanding just the physics of everything, right? Sound frequencies and how they can manipulate and trigger certain elements of memory and thought and all that kind of stuff and certain feelings, and being able to implement that in kind of an immersive experience. That's kind of where I think a lot of what we can do as entertainers, right? As filmmakers and entertainers, we can start, instead of just entertaining people with what we do, I think we have a responsibility to use our skills and our abilities and apply it to a way that's going to make a difference as well. So can you speak to kind of the immersive element of this stuff?
That's awesome, and I'm so glad that we're actually having the conversation, because you're right. I think we almost have like a moral obligation to have the discussion and use technology to advance medicine in a way that, again, maybe it treats physical disabilities, but maybe it treats those unseen injuries that we were talking about. I originally started using video games way back when the Wii first came out. Actually, you can even take it back before then. When I was burned, we were gearing up to go to Bosnia, and I got burned real bad in a vehicle rollover. And during that time, I remember as I was recovering at the burn center in San Antonio, my roommate was playing Final Fantasy, and he was a cancer survivor, and he was going through chemotherapy while I was going through intense burn rehabilitation. And our therapy was, I watched him play Final Fantasy VII, and he played it, and it was everything for us to just, one, build rapport, two, to be lost in a space that is safe and comfortable. And fast forward like several years, the Nintendo Wii came out, and we saw a lot of therapeutic use in the Wii because it simulated day-to-day activity, like, kitchen stuff, chopping fruit and vegetables, playing sports and all that, and gave us an opportunity to be able to engage in those things without actually having to be in it, in a virtual environment. When I went to Afghanistan, I knew that I was going to have a small space to treat brain injuries and cognition deficits. And so what I used quite often was different brain games to be able to say, because I knew, well, first of all, we have to know that gaming and technology is the most generationally relevant medium to be able to talk to these people, to use for our current set of service members, well, anybody. And if you fast forward 30, 40 years, you and I, we're going to be like in nursing homes, and the therapist is going to ask about what we
No,
like.
I'm not going to be. I'm not going to be nursing home.
Well, they're going to ask us what we want to do, and I'll be like, I want to play video games, and we're going to be ready to play them, and it's going to be great for us. And so, as we're looking at that stuff, we saw that being able to immerse in these different environments gives us an outlet to be able to, one, to lose ourselves, which is sometimes a good thing, but two, to connect with our brothers and sisters that maybe we deployed with, or maybe we, found ourselves building relationships with, and now all of a sudden we have a very healthy place to be. One of the I worked with a couple, Alex and Tim Porter, who did a lot of who currently do virtual reality immersion therapy, which kind of puts you in the environment, giving you an opportunity to experience life without being in life. And I think that gives this really cool space to trial, to make mistakes and then learn from them before you have to do that.
Right.
Go ahead.
And to speak about Alex and Tim, they do amazing things, right? And they're incredibly brilliant.
Yeah.
In what they're able to do, while being grounded at the same time. So and the reason I say that is because we got connected with them through a colleague, Danny and Mason. Actually met them on an airplane of all places.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know it was very serendipitous because we connected and we met up and we started having conversations about them developing some immersive experiences for our films to augment and enhance, some of our projects. And that led into a new line of thinking that kind of led to what this is right here. And unfortunately, they couldn't be here to join us because of everything that's going on. But still, the conversation is imperative and important. And what I was able to learn from them in what was possible through that immersive experiential type of entertainment and everything, I immediately saw the healing elements of that.
Absolutely.
And I know that the Army had tried to kind of started experimenting with some of it, but it wasn't at the level that we now in the citizen space can actually accomplish.
Right. That's a good point because I actually at one point in time, all my handles were like Army OT guy, and there was a point where the Army would only let me do so much. Matter of fact, they shut down a lot of the work that I had done because, Army regulation and whatnot. And I rebranded to OT Unleashed because I now have the ability to very properly put things in the place they need to be. And that gives me a different avenue to explore. And I will say, like with Tim and Alex, and I've worked with them before, they're incredible. I mean, their ability to develop worlds that don't exist is amazing, and it's beautiful work. And we'll put their kind of the links to some of their work, on the YouTube channel after this. But one of the conversations we had was like, especially some veterans that are having post-traumatic stress or having issues with adjustment back into the civilian world. One of the things that we had a conversation with was like, well, maybe we could create environments where if they were to experience them virtually and react adversely in those spaces, I could then start to build their confidence in a civilian world, which is the United States that we're used to. So let's say like a shopping mall, for example, and you have, Black Friday, there's thousands of people, and you just want to go out with your wife because you know that you want to build that relationship, but you're terrified of it. Like I obviously wouldn't throw a veteran having issues with, crowds and people into a space like that. And so, so in a virtual environment, what I could do is build the mall. I could make it like a Tuesday in March where nobody's shopping at 10 a.m., and then I could potentially take them through the scenario that would be going to a mall. And as we start to feel more comfortable, I can make that harder. And in that mall now in the virtual world, I can make there more people. It's a Friday night on payday, and now it's a little bit more challenging. And then, eventually build up to a place where you have a Black Friday with tons of people in it, and then start throwing other cultures in that you're maybe not comfortable with. And so this is a great space to explore those things in a controlled environment, and you can
without
really
affecting other people.
Without affecting other people, and being very, very purposeful in your, content with them, like, and it can be very individual too, so it's awesome stuff. And in the future of that, it's just going to be incredible.
Well, I think that actually segues nicely. I'm going to give you the clicker here because we have your opening slide here pulled up behind us, and now it's right there. So green means go, and that's going to take us to the next thing, and we'll let you just kind of steer the ship and take us through kind of some of the stuff that you're working on.
Yeah, well, thanks, and I'm just going to breeze through a few of these things just so I'm not going to stay on anything for too long. Because I think a lot of things are important, and certainly if you guys have questions after this, please reach out to me, and I would love to answer those offline, because this venue could go for hours and us still not getting to the end of it. But let's take a look at a couple things here. First things first, this isn't anything new. Like my profession, occupational therapy, actually was born out of World War I, and we would take soldiers off the front line and engage them in activity. And we would, give them things and normalize life and say, hey, what you're doing right now is not normal, but let me show you what is normal. And they would do like wood crafts and things like that would say, hey, remember this from home? That's still there, and let's get back to that. Right. If you fast forward to now, we don't do a whole lot that's different, except for now maybe it's video games. Like, hey, we're still normalizing life. We're playing video games and building that rapport and some of that stuff. And so I think that's really important to kind of point out that, the approach hasn't necessarily changed. It's just that it is different. We see it differently. And it's more important to the advancement of this generation for their mental well-being. So we see a lot of things like adaptive sports and everything. All those things are out there for wounded service members, again, physically and mentally. And you see some different types of things. But the problem is that what happens when they're at home, and that's most of the time we spend is at home. So if we're at home a ton, we have to give them great outlets to be able to serve themselves for the majority of the time that maybe they're stuck. And of course, these would be the guys with physical disabilities or maybe some mental health injuries, and I want to be able to get back and chat with my friends, get back online, play Call of Duty with buddies that I did in Afghanistan or something like that.
Because, and so, not to interrupt you here, but I think that's one of the elements that is huge. I didn't play much video games because I'm not much of a gamer, right? Yeah. But, a lot of the guys that I deployed with did, and that was one of the ways that they were able to actually just exist, without, when they weren't, outside the wire and on missions and doing that. And it was something that was a regular thing. You would go home, and what would people do in the barracks? They would have their own little tournament. They'd play. So that connectivity is huge, and being able to use the technology that we have currently to connect people. Guys in Wisconsin, guys in Texas, guys in California, they can all come together, still do what they did overseas, and by default, they're helping each other in those moments.
Yeah, even though they don't even know it. Matter of fact, OSD, I'm the chief medical officer for OSD. So OSD was born out of the fact that we saw the power of gaming and how it affected veterans overseas. And so we started sending video games to veterans overseas because we saw that, hey, this medium could actually connect people and be super effective. And so that's kind of where we were born. And, of course, now we've really broadened our perspective of what communities look like and how we can better serve the veterans and even civilian communities to work together. So it's actually brilliant and it's fantastic. But let's run through a couple more of these things. When I look at gaming itself, I look at it two ways. So one is how can I use gaming therapeutically, but also how to manipulate games and whatnot so that I can make it accessible for everyone. And a lot of people, a lot of therapists, medical community is looking at that more and more. And so we do like a lot of things where, we can use biofeedback mechanisms. We can use your phones and tablets. This brand Mightier is a fantastic way to manage your stress, but also play games at the same time. So if you are playing a game with Mightier, they actually shut down the game if your stress level gets too high. And you have to practice breathing techniques in order to open up the game again. So it's pretty fantastic, and it's geared for kids, but it's something that
that's absolutely
we're all kids,
circle with
right.
everyone. We're all kids, right?
Right. So you see a lot of stuff with phones and apps and whatnot. And so there's stuff that the military has put together, PTSD coaches and breathers, and Lumosity for like, your brain coaches and everything. But there's, things that aren't necessarily geared toward that. So you have like people who are runners, you have objectives to take them out and go chase zombies, or this Super Better app. It just does day-to-day tasks to make you cognitively better and essentially feel better about doing things around the house. Like, hey, I drink a glass of water, high five, you get some points, But even games that aren't intended to do anything like Pokemon and other things, they're doing a lot of great things for veterans, bringing communities together and making you engage in that stuff. So there's a kind of there's a big push for that. So for some of these other guys, like that have lost limbs, there's you can get expensive and crazy and immersed environments physically, and so they have these things like the Karen that you see here, and the Karen puts somebody actually in a virtual environment, gives them this robust place to practice walking and practice engaging. If they fall, they're in a harness and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty fantastic, because if you fall in real life, it's a little bit rough. And patients would tell me like, hey, I want to walk. I was like, yeah, but there's so much more to life than walking. What are you going to do once you get there? And so this gives me opportunity. Now, this wouldn't be something that we have access to, but, there's stuff at home where we could like put them on the Xbox Connect, and you can see kind of how they would do some of this environment here that you see.
So it's
on
very
the thing.
kinetic still. Even
Yeah.
within a virtual environment, there's still a kinetic element that allows their body to retrain itself, in these environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to distract people with other things, because right now he's focused on like hitting birds out of the skies with his hands, but really, a big part of that task is just walking. And so if he can master the hitting birds out of the sky, he's not even thinking about walking.
Right. He's allowing the mind to kind of take over its basic
absolutely.
skill set.
And this one here actually was trying to build a virtual kitchen. And so if you think of a kitchen, you'd be shuffling around and grabbing like mayo out of the fridge and bread out of the cabinet. And it's not really walking. It's kind of what we call functional mobility. And so you can immerse somebody in a big type of thing like this. But at home, you could use like the Xbox Connect, or work with different environments like that as well.
See, and with technology the way it's going, like we all know now that you can get your own goggles and all that, and you can download an app, and you can see everything. You can do all of this, right? You don't need the most expensive gaming equipment to participate and be able to do this, right?
Right.
And whereas a lot of guys do have the gaming consoles. Maybe they can't afford one, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're like me, not a gamer. I lean more towards that immersive experience, right? And I want to see a story, so that I respond better to that.
Right.
So I think it's also identifying, what veterans respond well to certain elements, what they're comfortable with, but technology has made it so much easier to create those possibilities in those environments.
I think that's an important point, because at the end of the day, I can't necessarily create something that's good for everybody. For me, my approach for patients or any veteran is that you're your own individual, and what works for you may not work for Joe Schmo, or work for me. And I think that's a great point. I can't say that this is going to work for every single person. But I can say that it's going to work for a lot of people. But let's explore what's going to work for you, and let's go that direction. And I think that's one of the big places that the military might be missing, is because we're trying to make a global fix on an individual problem. Like if you and I got blown up in the same vehicle, you're going to handle that very different than me.
Precisely, because it's based on our individual differences and our personal experiences.
Right. Matter of fact, when I was in Afghanistan, we almost got shot down in a Black Hawk. I haven't told this story very often, but I was actually flying in the middle of the night. There was another soldier with me in there, and there was only 3 of us in the helicopter. And I've taken 1,000 flights, and all of a sudden we took fire. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but all of a sudden the whole cockpit just went up in lights, and I thought we got hit, and then the chopper just dove. And I thought, we're going down. This is how I die. And then all of a sudden, we went to the right and the left, and all these like evasive maneuvers. And I mean, it was terrifying. And I remember, I don't know how long it lasted, but all of a sudden, we were flying straight, smooth path. And when we landed, nobody talked about it. Pilots walked off. No questions asked. And I was, like I had a load of poo in my pants. I'm just kidding. I didn't. But I mean, that was an experience that. The other soldier I found ended up being working for another soldier that was a peer of mine, and it changed his life, and he has really struggles with that moment, and I also do as well. But it didn't torment me as much as it did him, and
Right.
that's a tough place to be.
It is, because and it's almost like as it relates to a lot of the responses. And let's just be real about it. There are a lot of similarities to every single war and conflict. There's never really a plan for how to address the issues. There's more of this idea of, okay, well, we got to find the solution and give it to everyone, and it's going to be fine. It's issuing a solution, right?
Yeah.
Just like you get issued gear, you get issued a solution, and that's just not the way the mind works. That's
No.
not the way the individual works. And whenever you separate, especially, you are no longer, a number. You're back to being an individual, and a lot of times that you got to figure that out on your own. That's even harder when you have an impairment, and issuing one medication for everyone is not going to solve the problem. So these are the conversations that need to happen, because there's a phase one to all of this, and that's knowing the individual and how does the individual respond.
Most important phase.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and that's, I actually, when I talk about mental health, and unfortunately I had a session that I was about to do on veteran mental health at a national conference here in a couple weeks that was canceled. But one of the things that I talk about a lot is that if I don't treat an individual, to himself, and I try to blanket a solution, then I will completely lose all the individuals in that solution. And how I love to make sure that I address individuals in my life, because I've had several soldiers commit suicide since I've been back, and you could probably talk to any veteran that has deployed or been around their peers that have deployed. I mean, we have all had people commit suicide, and it's devastating. So then you ask yourself, because me, who maybe hasn't had those reactions, I now have the questions in my life: what should I have done better for him? And my charge to you guys, everybody out there, is that love your individual people, love each other, because that's what's going to stop this stuff. Is this individual relationship that I have with these people that are around me, and so I can't stop everybody from having issues, but I can certainly love on people and tell them that they're important to me, and I need to make sure that I do that more often.
Well, and that's the starting point, because once you're able to break down that barrier and break that wall, then you can start diving into those deeper issues in the how. Then you can start to identify the how and point them in the right direction. And that's the key element that is, I think, one of the biggest problems that we've had with suicide specifically is a lot of these soldiers, and they're lost. They just don't know, and because nobody knows how to deal with them, how to engage with them, and there's something I like what you said about loving your other people. I was infantry, right? So it's like we're tough. We have to be that way, and yeah, we do, and we are, and we always will be. But there's something authentically human about allowing the barrier to come down and be okay. We had a colleague earlier on our Veterans and Entertainment panel, and former 173rd guy as well, and he went and was in Ranger Regiment for a while, seen a lot, and done a lot, and there even he says it's it took him getting involved in film and all that kind of stuff to finally actually be in touch with his emotions and realize that that was okay. It's not. You're not weak, you know, and that if in fact you're actually stronger if you're able to identify those things, which allows you to heal on a mental level.
Yeah, and that's where you have to find the place to do that. Like, you have to find, how do I get this person to cave into that okayness, you know? Like, yeah, you know, like, I remember I had infantry surrounding me all the time, and they were piss and vinegar, full of themselves, and we want them that way. I want you to be, you know, this gruff person who thinks he's better than everybody else, because guess what? That's why we're the greatest military in the entire history of the world, because you have to be that way. But I also have to be a person that can break you down later on, after all the fighting is said and done, and say, you're still a human in my life. Right. Hopefully I didn't infect you. But you're a person in my life, and I need you to be strong post-military. And how are you strong mentally after you leave the service? How do I get you there to find importance? You know, I always talk about these veterans who walk around, you know, and usually it's Vietnam, World War II veterans that you see with their hats, and they have their campaigns that they were in. And I ask people, like, why do you think they wear those things? And the reason is because at that time, they were important to somebody. They were important, and when I left the military, I remember thinking I was super important. Everybody thought I was such a, you know, inspiration. I did all this incredible work. And then the day I left, I felt a physical exit from the importance to everybody else.
The mission was no longer.
It was no longer there, and now all of a sudden I wasn't important. And so I recently actually bought one of those hats for this conference that I was going to do. And then I was going to say, so let me ask you this, and I put the hat on. Am I more important to you now? Is it important that you see that there's a Bronze Star on here, or there's this campaign? Remember, I was an OEFX or 10. You know, like, am I more important to you now? Because I shouldn't be. But if you see those people, and you people out there, like, if you see those people, love on them and ask them about their hats. Tell me about your hat. Tell me what's on there, because, you know, you place the things on there yourself. Like this right here, this was my nickname, FGB. People used to call me Fat Gerard Butler, and it was a nickname I got from one of my guys who got killed while I was over there. He's like, sir, you're handsome. You look like Gerard Butler, but fat. And so from then on out, they just call me FGB, Fat Gerard Butler. So anyway, but I mean, I put that on my hat because that was important to me, and I want somebody to ask me about it.
Right, because,
you know, that's important.
Okay, not to get too sidetracked, but that's the way that person lives forever. You know what I mean? You know, and because that story is permanent. That story is now out there, and it immortalizes that person.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
And that's huge. So, and that kind of leads into one of the purposes behind the Veterans Lounge, which is bridging that divide, right? Bridging the gap between veteran and citizen, because that is one of the biggest issues that I think we face right now, being well over how many years now into the current conflict? You know, like
19.
It's we're pushing 20, and you know, we still have not addressed that. You know, we're finally starting to get to a point where we're making an impact on veteran suicide, on mental health and physical health problems and all that stuff. We still have a long way to go. Don't get me wrong, I have a long way to go. But, you know, one of the things that has not been addressed is that divide. You know, and it's, as a veteran, you know, there is, you know, I was that way too. You know, I was like, I'm a veteran, civilians, they don't understand me. They don't get me. Right. You know, I'm off in my own little world. And it took, you know, a lot to get me to a point where I realized, you know, no, I have to make it in this world because that's where I'm at now. That's where I live now. And, you know, Rudy Reyes, who was going to be here as well, couldn't join us because of everything going on, you know, said one word that actually made a big difference in my mindset and my approach to that. And he said, don't call them civilians, call them citizens. Because, you know, that separates and gets rid of that whole that wall, right? It actually it now starts to bring everything together, because without the citizen, you don't have the veteran.
Man, you know, I have not thought of that, and I actually love that you said that.
Yeah, and
because I think that
and
does.
all credit to Rudy because he believes that and it is perfect.
Wow, that's great. Well, a couple things before. I know that we have limited time, so I wanted to make sure that some of the stuff, like, because there's situations where we have guys, and one of the struggles is, like, if you are an amputee, if you are somebody who doesn't have the physical access that a lot of people have post-veteran, that becomes a real struggle. Because all of a sudden your mental health issues have escalated a bazillion times, because maybe you don't have freedom on the road. Maybe you don't have the ability to just get out of your house and go, do something. And so, one of the things that I've talked a lot about is engaging, veterans in again, with each other in a digital space. But if you don't have hands, how do I occupy this digital space? And one of the things, and I'm going to fast forward through some of these slides real quick, because I wanted to show a couple ways that we've kind of tackled some of those issues. I work for another nonprofit called Warfighter Engaged, and our mission in life is to be able to. I know these are a lot of slides that we're going through, but that's okay. We're going to get to where I need to. But one of the missions for Warfighter Engaged is to basically give people opportunities to be able to play despite different type of physical injury, whether it be burns or limb loss or whatnot. So first thing you should know about me, like I'm always interested in how to play a game, and so this really occurred to me when I was the chief of the amputee center at the OT part when I was at Walter Reed, and one of the things that would happen is you'd get a guy, your patient comes in, he's lost limbs. And you're starting to get to know them. You say, tell me, what's the most important thing in your life? What do you want to be able to get back? And you know what their answers? The top two answers would be, I want to play video games, I want to have sex. and so...
Wait. In that order?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
but I mean, but it was so true. And occupational therapy, we deal with both of those things. We want to engage you in leisure activities, but we also want to make sure that your sexual intimacy is correct and right, and you're confident. And we want to make sure you can go to the bathroom on your own. And I mean, all those things. And so, so as we're looking at these things, I'm starting to try to figure out, how can I get somebody to play games again? And so I started looking at how controls were made and how effective they are. I was trying to help people play without a limb. And so an engineer, Ken Jones, and I started working together to build adaptive controllers for these guys, whether it be, stuff that you see here, like, big buttons or whatnot, or foot pedals or controls, all the way to doing like these big kind of built out systems. And so we would start doing a lot of these things. I would use splinting. I would use different thermoplasts to get people to be able to hold things and hold pictures and or hold game controls. And he would rewire controllers. But there was a big missing element, and that missing element was really industry. If industry really got into the mix, all of a sudden we would have a lot of people on our hands, and that's actually where Xbox came in. So you can see some of these. There's some of the controls we'd so if you lost your left hand, we'd put buttons on your Xbox controller all on the right side, or vice versa, and we put them underneath.
And not to interrupt you here, but there's something, because the human mind and the body are incredible, right?
Absolutely.
So when you are missing something, whether it's hearing, whether it's one of the senses or it's a limb or whatever, your body will adapt and put all that over. If you gave me one of those controllers, since I have both my hands, I would, and you gave me one of those controllers just the right hand, I would fail completely.
It's over. Yeah,
I'm done. Right? But if you give that to somebody who's already done that, they're probably going to kick everyone's ass.
Yeah, and we see that quite a bit. I have videos of me playing people that are blind, that don't have upper extremity use and only play with their feet, and they destroy me in games. And I mean, I'm not saying I'm an incredible gamer, but I'm a pretty good gamer. And the fact that somebody who can't see a single thing has no idea what's on the screen besides what he hears, that is destroying me, is incredible to me. But anyway, so Xbox actually started to get involved in, and if you guys haven't seen, the Xbox Adaptive Controller came out a couple of years ago. they had kind of reached out to us, looked at some of the work that we were doing, and asked us to come out to out in Seattle and Redmond, where Microsoft is. And we started having conversations about, we do all these things, but really if we could have this kind of brain, this hub, where we could just plug buttons into, we wouldn't have to build controllers from scratch almost, rewire things. And so that's kind of, that big conversation started there. And it came, and it's neat that a veteran-focused nonprofit would translate to the Xbox Adaptive Controller, because eventually they came out with this guy, and this guy has been a game changer, no pun intended, for so many people.
Well, now you have an example of this here with us. Let's take a look at that.
So, so you can see it here. So the big thing that you see here is a couple of the big buttons, here up front, and those are fine. But really, the meat and potatoes of this guy is right back here. And so if you see all these ports back here, there's actually 19 inputs here, a couple on the side. And what those do is, if you take a traditional controller and you break it out into all these different commands, these are all the different commands that you could have. So your A button, your B button, X, Y, your paddles, your bumpers, everything is right there for you. And so if I have somebody, let's say, that doesn't have a hand and he wants to throw a grenade, I can throw a foot pedal down and he can pop it into a bumper, and then all of a sudden he's got his grenade as his foot pedal. Or like, let's say, a driving game, that's his. I mean, it's more natural that it would be an accelerator. And so so we've done a lot of work with that. Warfighter. We do a lot of 3D printing, and we make our own buttons and switches. And so some people have, a little bit more gross motor movement. So if I didn't have a hand per se, I could still bonk my XY, ABXY or whatnot. And so there's all kinds of different things. We have switches that you can blow into, switches that you can operate with your legs. We want to make sure that no matter what, we can get you to game. And so people will say, well, like, what if I don't have this? I don't care about what they don't have. Tell me what they have, and we're going to work with that. So if it's like a quadriplegic person who can only game, the only control he has is his neck up, then we got to figure out different ways to do it, So maybe it's using a stick that moves left, right, up, and down, and you can blow in for commands, and you suck in for some commands, and you do all these different things, and so that might be the most challenging. But if I have an amputee with arms, I mean, they can still do this. They can bop things. They can poke things. There's all kinds of different ways to game. And so, matter of fact, we were going to reveal this at the next conference, but we made our Deadpool version of the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and you can see kind of our switches. Kind of came up with a Deadpool theme, but we 3D print all those things, and it's pretty cool, and again, all this comes back to enabling somebody to think that they can do.
Well, but that goes right into the healing aspects, right? So it's not just, you're not just going through therapy. You're not just going to see a doctor and this, because that becomes cumbersome at a certain point where you're like, am I even getting better at this point? But if you're able to find a way to normalize their life, and normalize their quote unquote condition, it's no longer a condition.
Absolutely.
What I mean? Right.
Absolutely. I had one of my patients, Monty Bernardo, once. He was speaking to a class of therapists, and he said, "I just need you to understand this. Your job is to convince me that." He said, "I can do anything that you can do, but your job is to convince me of that." Because I'm sitting here not knowing that I could potentially do these things. And so your job is to convince me that I can. And once I know that I can, the world's my oyster. I can do anything. But a lot of people get into a space where they say, I can't. And it makes sense, because why would you think you could, play video games without hands, or you couldn't see? And so you automatically shut that down, and that's not a thing that I can do. And you could talk about that mental health. I have PTSD. I cannot go to a shopping mall. I cannot go and have my back to a door. When there's loud noises, I cannot handle that. Well, I just need to convince you that you can. And once we can get there, then all of a sudden, so many mental health barriers start to break down, like when I came back, I struggled. I had major depressive disorder. I went through a divorce. I was I wanted to be a better father to my kids, but I was almost like numb inside. And I remember just being like, I love my kids, but I don't want to really be with them. You know, it was a weird feeling, and I hate to admit that because it sounds terrible. And I was always there, and I adore my kids. But it wasn't until I really sought out some help and dove into the people around me that I found healing. And then, you know, like that major depressive disorder became something more of an anxiety, and the anxiety became something more of a, you know, I'm adapting. And then now all of a sudden I feel like I'm a pretty healthy human that now can use some of that to really touch other people and help them and help convince them that they can now do.
Well, and I feel like, you know, and I love the physical aspects of what you're presenting, and you know, kind of to go back to one of the things we talked about earlier, which goes directly into the emotional aspects, is that's where the immersion comes in, right? That's where the immersive experience, you know, being able to actually, you know, create situations that are very realistic under goggles, under, you know, a soundscape and all that kind of stuff, to help people actually start to adapt to, because it's not anybody's fault that they feel a certain way, because it you know, the mind, it's TBI, it's PTSD. I mean, these disorders are real. They're not made up. They're not that you're weak. These things happen,
Right.
and you know, being able to plug you into a certain thing, to identify triggers, to identify certain points, to address them, you know, in those moments. I feel like, you know, immersive technology is probably one of the most effective ways to do that, you know, and I think that the conversation needs to expand, you know, more than just you and I sitting here talking, or Tim and Alex, you know, being a part of what we're doing. And it needs to grow into, and I couldn't be happier that Xbox is taking some initiative with this, at least from a console standpoint, right? You know, now with what we have, with the access that we have, immersive technologies need to start embracing these concepts.
Right. And you know, I think that when immersive technology really takes off in a place, because okay, we could provide immersive technology to people, and Tim and Alex and I, we have talked about this. I was like, I can provide an awesome service. The challenge is to say, Dallas, you know, it's purposeful to you, because what will happen is I can make something beautiful. I can make something that's like, oh my gosh, that's incredible, and that is beautiful, and what we're seeing is awesome. But what brings people back to gaming is playability and ability to want to go back to that. And in the military has done a lot of like, oh, that's cool, that's neat, that's unique. And I show people all the time like, oh, that's really funky and cool. It's like, but how many times am I going to go into a breathing app? You know, I'm going to be like, that's cool, and then I'm going to do it 5 times.
Where's the motivation?
Where's the motivation?
Yeah,
so
right.
so if you've seen Avatar or Ready Player One or things like that, that's where it needs to go. I need to
Gamify. You got to gamify it, right?
Give me purpose in that environment. Give me a place to go. Give me a place to do, and convince me that I need that. That's what's going to change things. Is convincing me that this is important to me.
Right, and that's where the commercial sector has to come in, right? You know, the commercial sector has to identify how to do that, and you know, obviously, what we're doing here is really pushing harder on that idea and on these concepts, because the only way that's going to work is if the commercial sector buys in to make it broader and outreaching. Because it's not, you know, these issues aren't limited to just veterans. I mean, there are, you know, countless people in the world that have, you know, mental health, you know, conditions, and you know, that need addressing. You know, and you know, demystifying it and making it less intimidating, you know, and demoralizing is the key element.
Yeah, I completely agree, and again, so you have to, like you said, gamify or give them, you know, focus, but then they have to receive it. And I think that if, you know, one of the big things here is that you need that person in your life to push you into that direction, you know, saying like, you know, I think this would be good for you, and I want to support you in that. Like, how can I support you in that? We need to give access to those things. I can't have things $1 bazillion, because, you know, a lot of veterans come out and they don't make a lot of money. They don't, you know, you were an infantry soldier, you come out and your skills are limited. Or you know, your translatable skills on paper
exactly.
are limited to where. What am I going to do with that? You know, so a lot of our soldiers that have seen awful things, have experienced loss and horrific things, come out of this experience, you know, these worlds of the military experience, and then they say, now I can't really engage back into the community because, one, the community doesn't understand me, but two, who wants, I can't go shooting people. That's not my job, you know, like, and so it's brilliant when you have a combat arms type service member that comes in, they have a vision, they find a place, and then all of a sudden they thrive, and then they bring those other service members with them. That's when it, you know, really comes
Right,
to play,
correct.
you know. And you guys, what you guys are doing with the Veterans Lounge, you know, production type stuff, like this is stuff that's hard. Like it's not something like, hey, this is a great job, you should go do it. It's I have a vision, and I want to share this, and I think it's going to be purposeful and important.
Right, exactly, and that is the reason that the Veterans Lounge needs to be bigger and
Yeah,
broader.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Eric, I appreciate your time.
Man,
Yeah, thank you very much for being
great.
here.
Thank you, Dallas. Yeah.
And that's going to do it for the innovative immersive panel. We are going to break for a bit and set up for some podcasts. So stand by, and we'll be back with you. Thank you.